Right, we're back again. My good friend Odon over here. How are you doing, Odon?
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Jay. Hello.
Have you noticed quite a few of these questions are about the Quran? So we're kind of carrying on to the Quran because there's a huge amount of interest, and I think people like what you're saying. You seem to have a good grasp of what's going on here. So I want to bring up this idea of the patchworkness. These are two questions, or two different people actually talk about this. One is a guy named Killian Kleiber, and another one is that Peter Shears also talks about the patchwork, and then another one is Arunaba Ghosh. So let me read you their questions, and let's see if you can, well, you will be able to answer it because I see you already have an answer here, but this is so everybody can hear it. And here's the first question by Killian Kleiber. He says, I really like your approach to the Quran, Odon. We should cast aside the idea that it was written by a single person. Just throw that aside, he's saying. The best metaphor that comes to mind is a patchwork. There are the authors of the original patches. This material is pre-Islamic, possibly Syro-Aramaic texts. Then we have the editors who sewed together these patches and also brushed them up, possibly the Quranic Nazarenes. The next editors are the Arabs who added the diacritical marks. That's a third process. This already imposes a reading of the Quran. Finally, we have the narrators of the Hadith and Surah, that's the Standard Islamic Narratives, who placed the Quran into a fictional, historical, and geographical context and claimed a fictional author, in this case, Muhammad, and of course, about the God Allah. All of these people created what we call the Quran today. Do you want to say something about that real quickly before I go on to Peter Shears? If you want to respond to that.
Yes. This is... I will make this point, I think, often, because we have really to get rid of the Islamic concepts. And the first concept is that the Quran was made as a whole during Muhammad's time. That the Quran was not. The Quran comes from the gathering and editing of many different notes, many different fragments. It was not made from one person teaching sermons. It was made from the notes of many preachers, many different preachers. So it is a patchwork, but the patchwork was made by the Arab leaders many decades after Muhammad's time and after the preacher's time. So when Killian is speaking about the Quranic Nazarenes putting together, sewing together the patches, I don't think it happened during this time. This was the time of the preaching. It was not the time of the editing. There was no need for a book at this time. The need for a book came when the Arab leaders took power and wanted to prove their legitimacy. This was a time when they needed a book to challenge the Jews, to challenge the Christians who already had books. So at the beginning, it was not a book. It was only the raw material from which the Quran was made, was notes, collections of notes in Arabic without diacritic marks and so on.
So you're saying this came later as Arab leaders for two reasons. One is to give themselves authority and to challenge the Christians and Jews who already had revelation. They needed their revelation in contradiction to that of the others.
They needed their books. At first, they needed books. Thereafter, they will need revelation. But at first, they needed book to establish their legitimacy. And they upgraded their claim to legitimacy by claiming a revelation, a direct divine revelation. But you see, in the process which made the Quran was, at first there were preachings from many different preachers, maybe Muhammad among them, who took notes, who left notes. The notes were gathered, there was a selection, an edition, some corrections also. They were put together as a patchwork in order to have a book. So this was the book step. And thereafter, with the Abbasids, they needed divine revelation. So the book was made into a revelation.
Okay, so you're saying post 750, post mid 8th century, it was finally created, or that idea of an eternal Quran that has always existed, chapter 85, verse 22, that is protected by Allah, chapter 15, verse 9, that cannot have any changes, no human intervention, chapter 10, verse 15, chapter 18, verse 27, that was introduced in the mid 8th century and later, but in the 7th century, it was just really nothing more.
This was something else. And you see, Jay, because of this, because the standard Islamic narrative made something into the Quran that was not a divine revelation at the beginning, this explains a lot of contradiction in the Quran. Because the Quran at first was not made to be a Quran. The raw material of the Quran is pre-Islamic. Islam did not exist in the 7th century. So when the notes, the fragments were gathered, it was made into a book which was not Islamic at the time. And thereafter, centuries after, a century or 2 centuries after, when the standard Islamic narrative was created, they forced this book to be the divine revelation. But it is not what it means. So this is why we find so many contradictions in it.
Listen, this has been great. And I think we'll keep this as a standalone itself. This is important that we do that. We'll come back. And I think this has cleared up for an awful lot of people. Why is it that if you take a look at the Quran, just look and see, there's really no rhyme or reason. It doesn't follow any type of sequence. There's no chronology. It jumps all over the place. There are no complete stories. There's only one complete story in the entire Quran, chapter 12. It's ulta-pulta, jumps all over the place. And that's what you would expect from a patchwork. It's what you would expect from a patchwork of many different homilies, many different readings, many different lectionaries, even hymns that have been borrowed from others. And this is what it became, and that's why at some point it had to be elevated. It then finally got elevated during the Abbasid period to a divine revelation that cannot be critiqued. And that's why we're doing that for them, because the Muslims are not permitted to ask the questions we're asking, and they cannot even come to the conclusion you've come to, Odon. And that's why you're getting so much grief from Muslims who don't want to even talk about this. This is anathema. And that's why when even someone like Muhammad Hijab asked a simple question, which one of these Qurans are you going to write on my blank piece of paper? He said, we do not talk about this in public. And this is something as simple as the diacritical marks. We have different diacritical marks. This has been the biggest problem for 1,000 years, he said. Can you then see the dilemma for Muslims? If you put and elevate the Quran to divine status, as the Quran itself has done, if you put it above any human intervention or even human creation, then once you have elevated it so high, how are you going to defend it? The best way, the only way is don't talk about it. Don't bring it up in public. And you're doing that, Odon. You're actually saying this actually is a book written by many different people. And if it's written by different people, does it not stand to reason as you read it? You can see there are all kinds of different stories, contradicting stories. And there's lots of borrowings from many different existing pieces of literature that existed in Arabic at that time, or in this case, Syro-Aramaic or Nabataean Aramaic. God bless you. Thanks so much. This has been good. We'll come back again with some more questions on the Quran. This is Odon NJ, over and out.